right, welcome everybody to week one of Pro 221. This is a business management class, section or mod 221. My name is David Shipley. I'll be the instructor. Hopefully in future weeks we'll have more people actually come to the live session. Even just one or two would really help the discussion be more interactive. Becomes a little more difficult for me as the instructor when I don't have participants. So yeah, if you can make it, our normal time will be on Mondays at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. So hopefully that will work for one or two of you at least. And if not, that's okay. They're not required. You're not required to actually attend the live sessions. The expectation of the school is that you will at least review these recordings each week. And I think we can provide quite a bit of value for those of you who do pay attention to the recordings as far as the recorded sessions for the week's material. So we can make the discussion boards specifically for this class a lot easier. So a little bit of background on me. I am a financial advisor, certified financial planner for Zions Bank. Before that, I was with JP Morgan Chase, and before that, I was with Northwestern Mutual. I did have a small stint where I started my own business with a partner. That business is still running and quite successful. But I made a change in 2009 and decided to work for JP Morgan Chase at that point. So that's my day job. I work as a financial advisor helping people primarily with investments, but insurances and other types of planning during the day. And then I've been teaching through Steven Senegar online for the last, we're coming up on 6 years, primarily finance classes and personal finance and investing courses, but every once in a while business courses as well. So as you know, this class is a little bit different than some of the other classes that you might have taken. Some of these classes are formatted with just the weekly discussion board and then a week 4 discussion board. In these courses, the daily checkpoints and those weekly discussions are much more valuable than a normal course, because in a normal course, there's points are split between discussion boards, but they're also split between assignments and assessments as far as quizzes. So this has got a lot more points for each one of the discussion boards, as I mentioned on the discussion board this week. And so it makes it just that much more important to make sure that you get them done and do them well and follow the instructions. So a little bit about tonight. We'll go ahead and have kind of an introduction to the course. We'll talk about expectations for the course. We'll talk a little bit about this week's assignment as far as the discussion board and what we're expecting there as far as your memo, example of a memo. And then we'll talk about some of the readings as well as, spend as much time as we need to on kind of setting up a memorandum. So that's the whole purpose or point of this week's discussion board. And so we'll make sure that you come away from this session feeling very comfortable that you could accomplish a memo and take care of that discussion board. All right, so as far as the class is concerned, the idea here is for this particular course is talking about business communications, but more specifically electronic communications. So communications that we use technology to send. So we're not talking about snail mail in this class. We're not talking about things that you post on a bulletin board, although you could integrate that approach as well. We're not talking about traditional print advertising or communication. We're talking about electronic communication, and really that's a very topical course material as far as today's working environment. Most of us, if you currently work or if you have worked in the past or plan to in the future, once you're done with your courses, will all use electronic forms of communication, and some even more than others. My day job, working for the bank as an investment advisor, I'm responding and creating emails all throughout the day. I'm responding and creating text messages for setting up appointments and answering quick questions from clients that way. Just a lot of electronic communication that happens all throughout the day in my professional world, but that's not uncommon now. Most jobs will have forms of electronic communication that occur throughout the day. So very topical, very current. as far as information that is applicable to what you all, no matter what job you may have, you're going to receive and create electronic communications. And so this is a class to help us be professional about that communication, to make sure that we do it in a way that furthers what we're trying to accomplish in our career, as opposed to just stopping us or stalling us. So there are other courses about like interviewing skills, about resume skills, getting the job. This is more of it can be a significant piece when it comes to recruiting and trying to accomplish a new position, but primarily the intent of this course is to help us, once we're in that career, in that position, to use electronic forms of communication to our benefit, and to do it in a way that gives us opportunities for advancement, and doesn't put us in a situation where, either whether it's a literal list or a figurative list, we don't want to get on that list of the unprofessional folks that don't get opportunities to for upward movement within the company. Okay. All right. So a couple things that we want to talk about before we get to the content, specifically, the stuff that you need to know for this week's discussion. We want to back up a little bit and talk about kind of expectations for this course and what we want to accomplish here. So 1 second. Okay. So you should be seeing on this page course expectations, grades, and communication. We want to talk a little bit about this. We don't need to talk a lot about it. But as far as expectations, one of the key expectations for a course like this is that you will read through all of the required material, you'll listen to the session, and that you'll read through and maybe even reread through the instructions each week for the discussion board. As I mentioned earlier, alluded to earlier, the discussion boards in this particular class are even more important than discussion boards in past classes that you've had, because each one of these discussion boards is worth a lot more as far as the points are concerned. So expectation is that you will read through the instructions, you'll answer the instructions fully, so that might take a few times reading through the instructions, that you will turn in your coursework for this particular mod, which means that you'll have all 4 of the boards, all 4 of the weeks, that you'll have your instructions met as far as the discussions and the volume of content that's required for each week. And then that you will read the material that's required, which is always going to be under the discussion board instructions. And then finally, that you will, at least at a minimum, even if you can't participate in the live session, review the recorded session. So those are the basic expectations. Now, if you fulfill those expectations, in all likelihood, you'll probably get an A in the class. The folks who don't get an A in a class like this are the folks that just don't turn things in. And the folks that don't pass a class like this are the ones that absolutely just don't even try, don't even put in the effort to complete their discussion board comments. So if you want an A in the class, stay consistent with your daily checkpoints. Have the same time, same place every day that you go in and knock out the checkpoints. Checkpoints are about a half a letter grade. Well, actually, they're more than a half a letter grade. They're about a half a letter grade in extra credit. So checkpoints are a great way to get extra credit in a class like this. So I just strongly encourage you to every day go in and knock out that checkpoint for those points. But most importantly, as far as grading in this class, is going to be that you are consistent with your discussion board comments like we've discussed, that you follow the instructions on them, that you put in the extra effort and time, because most courses you'll have assessments and you'll have assignments. This class you just have the discussion. So plan time-wise to spend just as much time as you would have in other classes on all those other things on the discussions in this class. Put extra effort and time and energy and thought into doing a great job with the discussion board. Now you'll find, if you haven't had a class like this before, that the discussion boards kind of read more like an assignment. So in other classes where you have assignments, assessments, and discussion boards, the discussion board is more about just give some opinions and then we'll discuss it. This course and courses like it that are structured similarly, it'll focus more on giving you some instructions and actually fulfilling kind of an assignment-like submission onto the discussion board, and then talking about those discussion comments throughout the week like you would in any other discussion board. So as far as grades are concerned, if you complete everything on time and as instructed, you'll definitely end up with an A in the class. If you turn things in, if you turn everything in, you'll most likely pass. The issue that differentiates A's and passing in this class is usually turning things in on time and following all the instructions. So that's it. So just turn things in on time and follow the instructions, and you'll be in great shape for an A in the class. One other quick thing about work. A lot of times people will get nervous that if they have some emergency come up that they won't be able to turn in their coursework. I accept all coursework up until the end of the class, which is week 4 at midnight on Saturday. So if you have some emergencies come up and you cannot turn in your discussion board on time or complete it on time, you don't need to email me. You can if you'd like to give me a heads up, but most importantly, just get it done as soon as you possibly can. I cannot give full credit for late work, so you will get discounted if it's not on time. But I understand that in a course like this, things happen. Whether or not it's a computer emergency, a health emergency, family, work, moving, there's all kinds of things that can come up. And so every once in a while, I know that there will be, a student that's really trying to turn everything in on time, but just has a very extreme situation come up and they can't turn things in on time. They're a few days late. You're not going to lose a lot of points, so you don't need to worry about that. Just get it in as fast as you can. And as long as you stay diligent with checkpoints and follow the instructions, you're still going to be in good shape in the class and probably get the grade that you're looking for. If you get to the end of the class and you've put in the best effort that you can and you've turned everything in and you still find yourself short of the grade that you were looking for, just be in contact with me. Email me. Let me know that, and we'll try to come up with something that you can do to effort the additional credit that you need for the right score. Okay? So that's fair enough, and that's something that we can take care of in week 4. It's a little premature anytime prior to week 4 because we don't really know where your grade is going to be at until we get to that point. As one other thing to note on grading I usually do together. What I mean by that is I don't grade throughout the week usually. On-time work, I'll usually wait until Monday night, grade Monday night after our session, which will normally be on Monday nights. And you'll usually have your scores by Tuesday morning. Late work, all bets are off. I grade that as I can get to it. On-time work will always be graded. It's college policy to have all of it graded by Wednesday at noon. But I make it my own policy to try to get it done by Tuesday morning, and usually that's what I've been able to do in the past. So look for grades and feedback on your work sometime before Tuesday at noon each week. One more quick thing, if you will review the feedback on your grades, many times if you're not awarded full credit for a discussion board comment, or discussion board week, I will indicate what you can do to improve your score. So I might say something in effect of, good main post, I need you to complete a couple additional responses for some additional credit. And then you can go back in, complete those additional responses, and I can award you some additional points. Okay, maybe not full credit, but at least you'll get some additional points. Or for example, if you've given a really, really short main post, I might say something effective, the main post is a bit short. You're welcome to resubmit or edit that main post in order to add content. And if you'll do so, then I can award you additional points. So there's significant value in reviewing not only your grades for scores, but also the feedback to determine whether or not there are ways potentially to re-effort any particular week on the discussion board and accomplish additional points. Okay? All right, so that's one way that I communicate with you on the grading side as far as the feedback each week and getting grades completed for you. Primarily, the way that I will communicate with the entire class, if anything needs to be said, is through the announcements board. So I encourage you to check the announcement board periodically to make sure that you're caught up on what is going on. Hopefully, a bunch of people didn't miss the email and the announcement about tonight. And not know that it's tonight since it's a Monday. It's published as Mondays that we'll be having the course. This is just an exception because of spring break. and a vacation that I was on. But normally, if it's class wide, I'll stick it on the announcement board. If it's something that you need from me or a question that you have, the very best way to communicate with me is via email. As I mentioned before, I have a day job where I'm planning for individuals, and most of the day I'm either on the phone or meeting with people, and I'm not able to usually get to phone calls from students in the daytime anyway. So I encourage everyone to zip me an email. My email is on the main page. It's on my contact information. But it's even easier just to email through the course homepage by sending an email to me there. Then you don't have to know what my email is. You can just send it directly from a pre-populated list of instructors for the course. Okay, so I will get back to you within a day if you email me. It's not always immediate, but I can get back to you regularly that way, and it's an easier way for me to keep track of communication as well. Excuse me. So that we can stay in touch. So if you have any questions or concerns about the course, or if you get stuck on one of the discussion boards any particular week, just send me over a quick email and I can answer any questions that you have. Okay? So email is the preferred communication. It's david.shipley@stevenshenniger.edu, but that's also on the course information page, and also within your inbox, you can compose an email, of course, like you probably have with past courses, to your instructor or to fellow classmates. All right, so that's the communication piece. If you all have any questions about course expectation, grades, or communications as you review this, please just send me a quick email and we'll get that resolved. Okay, since we don't have anybody participating, we'll just keep moving. Might get done a little bit early tonight since we don't have people to interact with here. All right, so the week 1 coursework has some very interesting readings and has a really interesting discussion board, I think, as far as an opportunity for you to practice something that I think could be very helpful going forward. So one of the things that we'll discuss a little bit on the discussion board is kind of company culture. And an overarching issue when it comes to places of employment, any company that you might work for, or any company that you might someday run or manage or own, is culture. And culture can be established usually by the top, meaning by leadership. If leadership has a culture of, for example, treating the customer right, and they effectively train and communicate that theme or that culture throughout their employees, and then support them in doing so, motivate them to do so using different means of motivation, then you will end up over time with a culture of customer service, high customer service. If you have a culture of being cheap, being the least expensive company from a cost standpoint, and you communicate and motivate people to be that way, then you'll have a culture that's cheap, that's inexpensive or that cuts costs. There are all kinds of different company cultures, and one of the issues that's so important to communication that occurs between employees, and especially from management to employees, is this issue of culture. Those communications over time can develop into or establish a culture for a company. So just as an example, if I work on a team, let's say I work at a call center, and my team takes care of a contract where we do customer service for a cell phone company. So we take inbound calls for customer service for a cell phone company. If my manager is constantly communicating that I need to get off the phone fast and be efficient with how fast I get through phone calls, and that's what I hear over and over and over from my manager, then we're going to have a culture that focuses on being fast, and it could be at the expense of a good customer service experience, right? If I'm trying to get people off the phone as fast as I possibly can, I may cut corners, I may cut them off even, I may try to infer or assume what their problem is instead of listening carefully and patiently. So anyway, that's just a quick example of how a message from a manager can quickly be construed or be interpreted as the most important thing to that company. And whatever the most important thing is to a company, or the most important things to a company, if the employees perceive that something's the most important, they will start to create a culture around those most important things. And so we have to be careful in communication that we are stressing things that are truly the most important things, and not just things that happen to be a reaction and feel urgent at the time. So there's always that dichotomy of urgency versus importance, right? So we want to make sure that when we're communicating, we're very clear on what things are most important versus what things might just be urgent but not important, or not as important. Okay. And that's why people will have vision statements. That's why people will have trainings around corporate culture, and have very clear bylaws of the company, and purposes of a company, so that employees can read and reread and reestablish for themselves the true important principles of a company, the true culture of a company, as opposed to just interpreting culture from some messages that they've received over the years as far as things that were important to a manager at the time. Okay? So depending on where you are, you could have very varying situations and varying circumstances about company culture and communication that creates that culture. But it's so important. Companies that create bad culture over time, where employees are not happy, or employees are not making customers happy, okay, and they are interrelated, right? If we make the customers not happy, then we end up losing our jobs over time, because that company will go out of business and lack sales to maintain and grow. If we ourselves as employees don't like our workplace environment, we then many times will struggle to make it a good customer service experience as well. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. If employees aren't happy, a lot of times they're not as good at making customers happy, as you can imagine. And if customers aren't happy, then we get into a situation at some point where that company will not do well, and potentially go out of business, and we may lose our job. So corporate culture and how we communicate can effectively change that situation if it's happening, or it can just establish a good positive atmosphere and keep that good positive atmosphere and culture and things that are most important for a company. So that in a nutshell is why corporate culture is so important, and why communication adds or detracts from what we're trying to do from a cultural standpoint. Communication has a huge impact on it. The themes that we write about become what our employees and even our customers interpret as the culture of our company. And when a company advertises, they have to be very, very careful that the themes that they are advertising are consistent with their company culture. Not just a marketing company coming in saying, hey, this is how you can sell more widgets. It's got to be sell more widgets with the message that is our company culture. You got to integrate that company culture. And you could think of very successful marketing and ad campaigns that integrate a company's identity and culture through effective marketing as well. And then for this particular week and this particular course, we're going to be creating for the discussion board an example memo. And a memo is kind of an interesting form of communication. Usually it's meant to address an issue that needs to be taken care of. And it's a form of communication that usually is going to go out to more than one person, right? And so it's so we call it a memorandum or a memo for short, and we create some kind of message, usually fairly short, in order to address some kind of issue. Okay, either to correct a problem, or to further enforce or support something that's been going right. You could have a positive memorandum. You could have a correctional memo. But anyway, there's lots of different reasons why you might write a memo, especially as a manager. There's all kinds of different reasons that management create memos. But even as an employee, you might at some point create a memo to communicate some idea or issue to other people on your team as well, when trying to communicate to the whole group as opposed to just one person. Now, if you're just communicating with one person, you just zip them over an email, right? and you address it directly, or you address it in person. But if you're trying to communicate to a group, a memo might be a very effective way of doing that and getting that message across. Okay, so that's this week's discussion board. Is you're going to be doing some readings. Okay, and the required reading is an interesting one. It actually is kind of more focused on family relations than really business relations, and how family relations and all relationships are affected by technology. And this is interesting because it can definitely parlay into business and career relationships that we have as well. Relationships with our customers, relationships with our colleagues, relationships with our managers can all be impacted heavily by our use of technology. If we are the type of person that never wants to communicate face to face, we always want to text or email, that may be a detriment to us both in our family relationships, and that's one of the things that the study in the required reading this week is trying to look at, but it also definitely can be a detriment in the workplace at times as well. One of the things that we probably should mention as well as you read through that is the opposite might be true as well, which, what do we mean by that? We mean if you are unable to use or feel comfortable texting, or are unable to or feel uncomfortable using social media or using email, just real basic forms of communication like that, that may actually be a detriment to your career depending on what business you're in. So keep in mind it cuts both ways. Technology obviously can be a phenomenal tool of communication. If used too much, it can be a detriment. If used too little, it can also be a detriment. But anyway, there's an interesting required article this week before you get to creating your memo on studies done about the usage in different countries and different regions of the world with technology. It's pretty interesting, fairly short read to kind of give a foundation of technology usage. There are some non-required readings about technology and electronic forms of communication. And I would strongly encourage you for this week, before you write your memo, to go to what we will go to now and kind of walk through briefly. So let's go to that real quick. Actually, well, it doesn't really work with, I was going to give you some examples. We'll still do that. I'll just go through them more quickly without any people here to give feedback to. So a couple of things that I wanted to look at. I just created some short memos, and I wanted to discuss, hopefully with participants, some of the pros and cons of each one of these memos. If you're reviewing this, you can see there's a couple of significant problems with this memo right off the bat. One of the things that we would look at and say, okay, this doesn't really work, is the font, right? So it's this really, what would be a really nice font to maybe sign something on a wedding invitation or something like that. But when it comes to business communications and memos, we just need to be clear. We need to have consistent font. We need to make it very easy to read. Because all we're doing when we create something that looks like what we're looking at now is turn people off. They might not even read this. The other thing, there's a lot of things wrong with this memo. I did that on purpose to give you lots of things to consider as far as problems. It's just not well written at all. It's saying, it's using very well, it's just not professional at all. No more cussing on the premise. If I hear anyone swear, I will have to consider firing you. We had guests tell us that employees have been overheard swearing here. That is not cool at all. Stop it. Tom, your chief president manager. So there are much better ways to communicate that we need to, as a team, watch our language. This might work in a situation where, we're really informal, but it doesn't help a situation where we've got a team, we're trying to be professional. There are much better ways to communicate that, much easier ways to communicate that, much more straightforward ways to communicate that. Still could be a short memo, but it would be nice if you explained in a memo like this why, which you kind of have about the guess. We want to use language that is very clear. We don't want to use kind of texting language like "that's not cool at all" type of thing. Stop it. I mean, that's not professional at all. We can find a better way to word this and to write it so that it's written and communicated effectively, that we just need to watch our language. Okay, so that's one. Let's look at another one. Maybe a little bit better example. This isn't the one I wanted to go to next. All right, so here's another one. So this one's pretty clear, right? We've got the right font, 12 point, which is easy to read, very straightforward, easy and clear. There are some problems with this one though too. So it says effective immediately, no more cell phones are allowed on the sales floor. Regards, Bill Simmons, manager. So a couple things may be missing from a memo like this. First of all, if this is a new policy, which sounds like it is, right, from the memo, always better to explain the why of a policy, even if it is just brief. So maybe on this one, there have been, due to some customer concerns regarding our usage of cell phones, we need to, review the cell phone policy as a team, something to that effect. So effective immediately, cell phones cannot be in the public area on the sales floor in clear view or something like that. But it needs to be a lot more specific about cell phone usage. The challenge for a workplace environment nowadays, especially a sales floor environment, is people, customers expect you to have a cell phone. What they expect, though, is your undivided attention when they're trying to interact with you and when they need something, right? Some help, some assistance, some guidance. And so you would be very annoyed, all of us would be annoyed, if we walked into a Verizon store and all the associates were just sitting playing on their phones and no one came over to address you when you walked in the door. That's not because we don't like employees on their phones. It's just we don't like employees on their phones when we need something done and expect to be helped, right? So maybe they can come up with some kind of cell phone policy where, yes, of course you have your cell phone, but if there is any employee, or excuse me, any customer in the location or customer about to enter the location, everybody's immediately off their cell phone to give full attention to that customer. Something to that effect. And you as a team could kind of come up with that policy and then create a memo for it to confirm what the policy is in writing so that everybody can reference that. But anyway, the point is this memo is too vague. It doesn't give people a reason why. This kind of memo would come across like, oh, my boss is so authoritarian. He's always just coming up with crazy rules that are so extreme, and he just hates us, and he doesn't, he's always just trying to come up, he's just on a power trip. He's always trying to come up with crazy rules for us. So that's what you potentially communicate to your team when you have a very short memo that's pretty extreme like this one is. Okay? But it is clear, at least, unlike the other one, and it is easy to read, unlike the other one. But maybe we can get to a little bit better memo. And this isn't perfect, but maybe an example of a better memo. So let's look at the one we looked at just a little while ago. So you can see there's a little more detail on this one. It's a little bit longer, but still fairly short. Basically, in a synopsis, I was going to have participants in the session tonight read through this, but where you're just reviewing this later, we won't spend the time to do that. The gist of this is we want to make sure that we're clear on the why, I think, in a memo. And so the first paragraph talks about how, we have regular secret shoppers. The company goes to that expense so they can get feedback from our customers on how the customer service experience is. And obviously, we want that customer experience to be as good as possible because that is who drives our paychecks, right? We get a paycheck because people come in and are happy with what we do. If they're unhappy with what we do, we're going to stop getting those paychecks and we're going to shut the doors. So it's important to make people happy. Well, we've gotten some reviews recently from secret shoppers that say that we don't seem happy, we don't seem helpful or friendly. Okay, it's important for our customers to see us as friendly and happy because that makes for a more positive customer service experience. So, knowing in the second paragraph that we have an excellent team that's highly capable, we need to all do a better job, not only for the sake of shoppers and for the feedback that those shoppers provide to corporate, so we might all lose our jobs if we're a bunch of mean people, on the team. But more importantly, we need to make a better customer experience for the average person that comes in our doors. And so what can we do about that? Here's a memo that we need to consider and suggest that everybody consider just a simple thing like greeting and smiling more and how we can be more friendly, each one of us. And then we'll continue to have conversations about things that we can do. But if all of us are thinking as a team about how to be friendly and happy when it comes to our interactions with customers, it's more likely that they will come away feeling like we were more friendly and happy, right? Okay, so it's just something to keep top of mind. That's why I needed to create the memo. So as a manager, I create that memo, I send it out, or I post it. Either way, we make sure that the message gets communicated that this is very important, that all of us are a team in this. We've got to all be a little better with this particular issue. And here it is in writing so that all of us can keep it top of mind. Okay? So once again, not a perfect memo, but just an example of one that has a little bit more detail. This week's discussion board memo is supposed to be 150 words or less. This particular one is 189, so it's got a couple extra sentences, and it would be down to your 150. But that gives you an example of what a more effective memo is. It's not perfect. I just zipped it out in a couple seconds, but you can at least get an idea of the detail, having some more detail, being clear, and the format that you could put that memo in. So that's an example for this week's assignment. Okay. Now, real quick, let me make sure. Okay, we just went over the examples. And now we want to get to kind of a more basic how-to of memos. Okay, so you can see by those examples we were just looking at, they're pretty straightforward. There's not a lot to them. Now you have an example, so it's pretty easy for you to create an example memo on the discussion board this week. But I did want to point you to and walk through a few of the parts of a page I was looking for that I think is good. Here, one sec. All right, so we should be able to all see WikiHow to do anything. Basically, I was just searching around earlier today on memos and how to write memos, and I think this is an excellent tutorial on how to do it. Okay, so there's two parts to this how-to website. The first part is, do we even need a memo? What are we going to do with the memo? Kind of get the groundwork laid. And then the second part is a very good hands-on, step-by-step method for creating the memo. Okay, so the first thing we need to do we even need a memo? We need a memo if we're trying to communicate to more than one person a particular message. If we're just needing to do something one-off with one person or just a couple people, we probably don't need a memo. That's a little too formal. We can just go communicate directly with that individual or send them an email. But if we've got a group or a team that we're wanting to communicate to, it's a good reason for a memo. Okay. Then we want to establish and make sure we're clear in our mind, what is the purpose of this memo? Okay. We don't want to be sending memos for every little thing, right? But periodically, there's going to be something particular that could be addressed well by putting it in writing and getting it out to the entire team to be very clear about what we're trying to accomplish. Once again, kind of back to very clear in support of the culture that we're trying to establish as a company. okay? And we want to be as clear as possible in identifying that purpose. The better we can identify that purpose and really the detail of why, the why, once again, the better our memo will probably read. If we're unclear or vague on what we're trying to accomplish, we're just trying to bring down a rule, it probably will come across that way, and it will probably backfire as far as employee satisfaction. Okay, and then we want to narrow and make sure that we've got it simple and straightforward. We don't want it too much. Who do we want it to go to? Do we want it just our team? Do we want multiple teams across different sectors of the company? Do we want it just to go to a few of our colleagues that work in our particular department, but not the full team? There's a lot of different groups or subgroups that could be involved, and then others that should be excluded from a memo like this. We want to consider our audience whenever we write anything. One of the first things we learn about in English 101 is when we write, we need to consider who our audience is as we write. Okay? If we're writing to a group of 16 and 17-year-old servers at a restaurant, we may need to write differently than if we're writing to 50 and 60-year-old electrical engineers on an engineering team. Okay? Maybe not, but in all likelihood, we probably do need to write differently to those two different groups to get our message across and to have it communicated well. One of them might feel like we're being patronizing if we write it the way that we would have written it to the other one. And we always want whoever we're writing it to feel respected, to feel supported, and to understand what it is the message we're trying to get across and be motivated to do something about it. Okay? And motivating different groups, ages, cultures, demographics can be different. So we need to make sure we understand our audience and speak to that audience. Okay? All right, so there's part 2 is about, like I say, just the kind of the nuts and bolts. So we want to make sure that we have language and formatting choices. This is just a reminder here to make sure that we're not being, we're not using texting language. We want to be more professional with a business memo here. So don't use language that's too casual. We kind of alluded to this earlier, but we need to use language that's more professional. We don't want to use emotional language, right? We don't want to use language that sounds like we, in the heat of the moment, really mad, decided to write a memo. So that memo that I gave you as an example about language, right? Watching our language and swearing, that kind of smacked of somebody who was just really upset because they just barely heard this, as a manager from an employee or from a customer. And you can understand that them being upset from something like that. But what shouldn't happen is that frustration shouldn't come through or read through our memo. It should read very calm and level-headed and more analytical as opposed to emotionally charged. People don't react well. They get defensive when there's something that's highly emotionally charged. We want these things to lack that. We want it to be level-headed and clear as far as what we're trying to accomplish so that we don't get emotional reactions to it. Got signal phrases, says to use them. So different things, that might cite information, right? So background. Basically, I look at this part as like, what background do we have on the why for this particular memo and what we're looking to change. This is the font size, style, and size. Just keep it the standard format and size so that people can, it's very easy to read like we talked about. Don't use, like we showed, cursive or something like that where people might not even be able to read it, which defeats the purpose of even creating it. Use standard margins, that's pretty easy. Single space it, pretty easy. Have the title, could be memo or memorandum in the middle. You want to label it. I used their formatting. You don't have to use this exactly how it is, the to, from, date, subject, but I do like that format. I think it makes it very clear. You want a heading for the memo. You want to choose who's going to get it very carefully. Don't send it to more people than you should. That might sound weird, but believe me, if you're the person getting a memo that it doesn't apply to, that's a point of frustration and waste of time for others. Research the titles that should be used if you're sending a memo to a particular group. Make sure the subject is clear and that you've thought it through. It's concise. May not even want to have a salutation depending on the memo. Anyway, it goes through step by step by step by step. I think does a great job, helping you look at it. Okay, giving you different options, giving you examples, and then wrapping it up. Okay. Obviously, the last step, and this applies to emails, this applies to any kind of business communication that you'll be sending at some point. Review it carefully. You can avoid so many problems between colleagues, between managers, between clients, customers. If you'll just read through the email before you send it, make sure you're sending it to the right recipients, and make sure that you have worded things correctly, spelled things correctly, and that you're clear on what you're trying to communicate without being, as we've talked about before, emotionally charged or reactionary. You want to be in control, calm, and come across that way in your communications. And so we'll be coming back to some of these themes. They apply to all business communication, not just memos. But the nice thing about this how-to is that for your assignment this week, obviously it's just a memo, and so this will give you a great way to kind of step by step go through it, make sure you've got what you need for your memo and that you've completed it with all the different steps and that you'll be in good shape. Okay, but just know that most of this material is applicable to any kind of communication that you're involved with. Okay, so now that we've gone through that, one other thing I just wanted to show you briefly. Should be able to see my screen now. There's a digital distractions test. I did want to mention that the link, for some reason, the link to this particular test is doesn't work when you just click on it. But if you do a search for a digital distractions test, it'll take you right to, like a Google search for it, it'll take you right to it. It's the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction. Has stuff about pornography and stuff about, being addicted to, for example, the internet, all kinds of weird things like that, and different things like that. I shouldn't say weird, but different types of things with technology. But there's a quiz on here about digital distractions and how distracted you are by your devices. And most of us, if we're honest, are pretty distracted by devices these days. And what this can help you to kind of think through is, are those distractions potentially hurting relationships that you have? Not necessarily, the relationships you think of, like your family, for example, which it might be doing that too, but even relationships at work, between you and between customers, or between you and colleagues or managers. And those types of distractions, if not kept in check, could really hurt our opportunities to sell, our opportunities to service, our opportunities to have upward mobility within our workplace as well. And so just an interesting survey. I thought I'd show it. It's pretty quick. It's like 12 questions. If you answer them honestly and then submit for your information or results, I think it's an interesting, there's some very interesting feedback on that. And I think it's worth all of us considering. It kind of circles back to that required reading that I mentioned on the discussion board. This is a non-required one, but the required one talks about, how there is a potential for familiar relationships or important relationships to be significantly impacted by how much time we spend on devices and using different devices, social media, texting, instead of actually having face-to-face contact, which we know is a potential problem, but their research tends to lay it out in a way that helps us to think through it. Okay? So that's another part of this week's material that you can look at and review. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint here. Okay, so we've talked about the how-to. We've got that wiki site that basically helps you develop. I think it's a very good site, step-by-step site, to help you with this week's discussion board. And the memo that you're going to be creating for this week's discussion board has to do with technology usage at the workplace and some form or some rule that you're trying to implement as a manager for your team with reference to using their technology at work. So should be interesting. You can take it any direction you want. There's no right or wrong, implementation strategy, but there is, the basics of a memo that you can learn from reading the material or checking the site that we just looked at or checking the examples that it provides before you complete it. Okay? Okay. So that's all for tonight as far as the material that you need to get started and what you needed as far as the coursework for this week, especially as it pertains to memos. So since we don't have anybody on live tonight, we'll go ahead and wrap up the session. But if you, like I say, have any questions or concerns, let me know. And let's see if we can't get at least a few people onto the session next week, 8 o'clock Mountain Standard Time on Monday. Okay, have a great evening and good luck this week. Look forward to the course. I think it'll be a very interesting course as you go through these different mods as far as the discussion board is concerned and go through these different exercises, and I look forward to it. Have a great night.